So I'm happy to introduce Klaus. Klaus doesn't need any introduction, I was told, but because it's my first time in Gala, that's what I'm gonna do. Klaus will talk about the 5 surprising things that he learned from the Gala Terminology Academy. Klaus studied translation, conference interpreting, and technical communication, both in Austria and California. In 1996, he founded Kaleidoscope, which is a technological company, and he's currently the CEO of Eurocom Translation Services. He served as Gala Board of Directors member, and is now the Termnet and ELIA, or ELIA board member. He plays the guitar, electric guitar, and the saxophone, and he likes hiking and he likes climbing in the rain. I'm Italian, so I prefer the beach, but I'm sure that your speech is going to be interesting. So I will leave the floor to you and enjoy his speech.
And just to follow up on that, I don't play guitar and saxophone at the same time.
Really?
No, haven't figured that out yet. No, actually, I don't think that was in the notes. Anyhow, yeah, welcome to my presentation. A presentation on terminology, of course, that cannot miss in a language or Gala conference, and I'm glad there's always a few people showing up for this fringe topic, which I think probably will not be that fringe anymore. Before I start on actually terminology, I wanted to also mention the Gala Academy. Has anybody been in a Gala Academy already? I know that, of course. Yeah. Does anybody not know what the Gala Academy is? Excellent. Then you should check it out, because the Gala Academy, actually I took that header from the Gala website. It's tailor-made localization training for the language industry. It's a lot of people putting their minds together, such as Katka, for example. You did one on quality management or something similar. And there's always one going on. It's paid, but honestly, I mean, it's not very expensive, particularly if you're a Gala member. And we, for example, we send one of our people to each one of the academies because it's absolutely amazing, the content you get. So sign up for that, check it out. We ran the Terminology Academy, or Terminology Management Academy, and the way we set it up, just so you also get an idea maybe how such an academy actually works, we had 3 sessions. I followed Katka's model, so we had 3 sessions on different topics of terminology management that you can, I think, yes, see up here on the screen, so I'm not going to read that to you. And what we did actually is we invited a lot of experts. So it was not only me and maybe my colleagues, but we had tons of experts. I was told you probably can't read their names on here, but the idea here is just to show we had a lot of people that were presenting, sharing their thoughts in this academy. So it was a lot of discussion, a lot of insights from many different aspects and many different people. And that's why I decided to submit this paper, because there were some surprising things that we did not expect. I mean, I've been working in terminology management for 20 plus, 25 plus, don't even think about it, quite a while. And still there can be surprises when it comes to terminology management. I made the mistake of submitting 5 surprises. So I had to boil my surprises down to 5 topics of surprises, which are basically these here. And the way I prepared my slides, by the way, I think they're probably available afterwards anyhow, is I put a lot of quotes from different participants on there, and I'm going to talk a little bit about these quotes, because I think this is very easy to then post on LinkedIn or just remember, because quotes are something that, that you can very easily remember. So these are the 5 topics. ROI, or return on investment. So basically this is about money. Business value, again, this is about money or maybe cost. A little bit about maturity. Talk about that later. Then my favorite topic in terminology management, upstream. So I will explain you what that means. And then, of course, there was also AI, obviously. AI for terminology, but also terminology for AI. So those were the 2 aspects there. So what did we learn? Well, I'm not sure. Yeah, you can read this nicely. I actually can't read this on here, so I'm going to have a little bit of a hard time. But what was interesting in terms of ROI is we seem to always have time in the localization process to fix things that go bad or go wrong all the way at the end. Everybody pretty much agreed on that. So you say no, but typically that's almost built into the schedule is, fixing, testing, iterating, getting it right. And we were all wondering, if you build that into the process, why can't you build reasonable terminology management into the process up front and then avoid a lot of those fixes in there? So that was something that was quite surprising, that there was a lot of discussion around that, because of course, in the end, the source language needs to be okay, not only for translation, but also for translation localization to actually go well, the source needs to be okay. And arguably, I would say also for the people who use it in the source language, whatever the product may be, software a lot of the times, needs to be okay. Another very interesting topic that came up was the topic of metrics. So in localization, in translation, we kind of have metrics, like we know, how many words a day are you supposed to translate as a translator, how much is a word gonna cost, more or less. I mean, this varies a little bit, but we do have kind of an idea. How do we measure quality? How do we do all that? And in terminology, that actually really is lacking. We don't really know how many terms a day does a terminologist produce. How do we measure if that is a good entry or not? How do we pay for it? Do we pay for it at all? Some customers assume that terminology management should be free. Should it or should it not be? What skills do you need as a terminologist in the target languages, in the source languages? So a lot of these things are just completely unclear, and there is no standard, or not even an agreement in our industry about that. So I found that quite interesting. Also, I have to turn around and actually find the quote because I can't read it on the laptop. One very interesting thing we also found is the problem of willingness to pay for terminology. Maybe a short poll. Who here is a customer who pays for translation? Okay, not very many. Do you also pay for terminology? Excellent. Okay, so some of you, so probably here the people in the room are already upstream. We found that it's a lot easier to get paid for terminology if you make it clear what the additional benefit is. For example, one of the quotes that I have here is knowledge workers spend 30% of their time doing research. So if you have good terminology, there's a lot you can save, not only in localization, but in all of the knowledge work that you have in your company. So also as an engineer, as a support person, etc., etc. And there was one quote that I also want to share with you. Barbara Karsh actually said that. She said, anything we do in terminology management, we should be proud of. Because there were a lot of people that say, I know we're not doing it right, and we're only doing it. She says, no, whatever you're doing, be proud of it and keep doing it. So that was a little bit about the return on investment. The other thing we talked about was, we always need to kind of sell terminology to our superiors, be it, I don't know if I'm in an LSP, even selling it inside the LSP to your boss, explaining to them, listen, we need to do terminology work for this customer. Then, of course, selling it to your customer. If you're on the buy side, you always have to sell it to your superiors who give you the budget and the time and all of that to actually work on terminology. So we talked a lot about actually how can we do that? How can we sell terminology to the people who give us the budget? And one of the interesting things we found there is we're talking to C-level people. C-level people very often don't really care about language, or they don't really care about quality. They don't care about consistency. They don't. And we should admit that because it's pointless to keep talking to them about that when they're not interested in that. They're interested in many other things. They're interested in how does that impact our revenue? How does that impact our cost? How does it impact maybe not getting sued? That's interesting, depending on who you talk to. How does it impact, I don't know, reducing our support calls because customers actually understand what they read? How does it help us to avoid having to pay penalties, for example, because the terminology was not correct and some nifty legal person figured out, oh, well, but this is not a product that is working well because the terminology is wrong, so I'm going to withhold 10% of the payment. That's something that the C-level cares about. So we should address these things. Another thing that we found out is terminology management is expensive if you do it right. Yeah, it's a lot of work. You need a lot of people working together on this. And very often it doesn't make sense to try to get that money only inside the localization division. You need to upsell it and you need to make clear this is really something that is going to benefit the entire customer. If you're an LSP, it's going to be your customer. Or if you are the customer, it's going to benefit your entire company. And then the business model is just a lot easier. But we have to, at the same time, make it clear, we in the language industry, we know how to do it, so trust us in doing that, and don't let IT run the terminology project. Let us do it because we know how to do it. The same thing actually for AI or language model projects. And then one thing I always mention is that a lot of customers say we don't need terminology management, or we don't even have terminology. There are customers that say they don't have terminology. So to start with, everybody has terminology, because if you write something, you're using terminology. It's like this was not done by a native speaker, not possible, because everybody is a native speaker. You have terminology. But what you might not have as a customer or an LSP, you might not have a clean or a lightweight process to manage terminology. So you do it chaotically, nobody sees what you're doing, you're not calculating how much time you spend on that, you're not calculating the bad results that you have. So it's chaos, and what terminology management actually does is it converts this chaos into a structured process. And that is something C-level understands. Because a manager, if you tell them we need a process, they're going to be like, yes, process, at least where I live. And I know this is a little different in the US, but in the German-speaking country, if you say we need a process, everybody's like, yes, process. Scandinavia is the same. I don't know about the southern regions. I don't know how well processes work there, but they are going to understand that you need to have input, what do we do, output. They understand that. And we can do that and use that for terminology as well, because if you don't have a lean process, that's actually the most expensive way to manage terminology. How am I doing? Yeah, pretty good. Another thing is we had one participant who was from an engineering company, very interested and interesting his contributions. He said actually they don't even call it terminology, they call it data governance. I also found that very interesting, and the reason is they said they did a research and they found out that every day at that company they produce 2,000 new parts, and of course each part needs a name, and that is essentially terminology management, but they don't call it terminology management, they call it data management, because they don't want to be creating 2,000 parts every day if that already exists, but under a different name. So that's interesting, and he also said that by calling it data management and data governance, he actually got C-level buy-in. Not terminology, that was too linguistic, dictionaries, we don't need that, but data governance, yes, that we do need. So again, addressing the C-level with the words that they understand is kind of the clue here. And there was one other participant, also super interesting. I think this is like the goal where everybody wants to be. She said that they have actually built terminology into their innovation process. So they have a step in their process which says if you're not clear what you're going to call this thing, you cannot continue developing it. So I found that very interesting. I don't know, you raised your hand when you're a customer. I don't know if you have something like that as well. Yeah. So she's not the only one. I found that super interesting because if you achieve that, terminology stops depending on people. You know, if your two terminologies leave the company and there's no more terminology, because it's actually in your corporate processes and it can't go away anymore unless somebody changes the process, which is always a little bit difficult. And she said that the way she got that in there was to say she thinks it's better to think about terminology once too often in the process than afterwards hearing, oh, we can't change this now. We know it's wrong, we know it's silly, but it's too late to change it. So that's how she got that in there. Yeah, the next one is, this was also very, very interesting, actually, this discussion about the terminology maturity model. Who of you is familiar with the localization maturity model? Yeah, a lot of you, CSA research, if you're not familiar with it, but that doesn't exist for terminology. And we thought it would be very beneficial to actually also have that for terminology. What did we have here? Yeah, so what that actually means is, if you compare it again to localization maturity, you have this ranging from -3 to, I think, +5 is the highest level. And -3 actually means I refuse to translate anything. I don't think this is necessary at all. 0 is, okay, well, if we have to translate this, then so be it. And 5, of course, it's inside all of your business processes. And something like that would be interesting for terminology as well, because the way, again, one lady put it in there is, if you want to make terminology part of your business processes. You just have to get on people's nerves all the time until something happens, and then that company realizes, oh, you were right 2 years ago when you started saying we need terminology management. Yes, we do, and then they do it. That's actually called a compelling event in sales. So if you are from sales, you will know that, and we work with that a lot. And actually, that's also something we found out. Terminologists, or people who run the terminology process, they very often are salespeople. Who of you actually runs a terminology process, or is a terminologist or something like that? Maybe you can confirm that. So you basically have to keep reminding everybody of, hey, you didn't look into the term base. Hey, remember, we have that. So you're basically a salesperson selling terminology. Of course, in terminology, we need human experts, obviously. I mean, AI has started doing a lot of stuff there as well, but we obviously need human experts. And I personally don't like the human, what's the human in the loop? I don't like that very much because, again, everybody's a native speaker. That doesn't mean they know how to translate or even speak. So being human, I think, is not enough. You need to be a human expert. And I also think in the loop is not enough. We should be at the center. We should be guiding that and not being asked occasionally whether what AI is doing is okay. And the same here in terminology. One other very interesting thing about this maturity or terminology getting mature in the company is that a lot of people from the buy side, again, from the company side, said the difficult thing actually is to get it going. Once you have it going and you can run around, as a salesperson saying, oh, look at this great thing I have here, a lot of other divisions and departments are going to say, oh, this is so cool, can I also participate? And they're going to jump on it. So it's really this first thing that is the really difficult thing. Yeah, and one thing that came back is something that we tried to promote, I don't know, 10 years ago or something like that. We were saying you need to push terminology upstream, and we found nobody understood what we were talking about. We found that, again, nobody understood what we were talking about. Actually, it was Daniel Brockman from RWS, who probably most of you know, who said, I didn't know that term either, but he called it GRUTS. I don't know if you know GRUTS. That means getting it right at the source. It's the acronym. Apparently comes from the music industry. I don't know who from you is from the music industry, but it basically means if your initial track is bad in music, it's really hard to make it good later on. You can kind of work on that, similar to what we heard, about synthetic voices and all of that. If you get it right in the beginning, it's a lot easier to do that later on. And that's the concept of upstream. So it basically means, I made a little animation here. If this waterfall thing, I took that picture, so I'm allowed to show it. If that waterfall here, talking about rain and hiking, so this is my perfect place. Outside the waterfall. So if this is the point where things go into localization, upstream would be everything that happens before that waterfall, and downstream would be everything that happens after that waterfall. And of course, the idea is every error you make upstream gets really expensive downstream, because similarly as in a river, you have new rivers going into that one, it gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and things are really hard to stop and to change when you go down. So pushing it upstream really makes a lot of sense, because everything that goes wrong before will be expensive downstream, for example, in localization, but maybe even further downstream, right? What else did we have there? We also said, obviously, doing terminology management in the target languages is a little bit too late. So in localization, that is very often the point where people realize, oh, we have a problem, because all of a sudden you have 30 problems and not one. But that is a little bit late. So upstream again, you should get it right at the source. And if you think this through all the way, the source is actually coming back to this, in the process innovation or in the product innovation process. Wherever something new is created in a company, that's when you should start thinking about what are we going to call it. That is actually the source. So the first engineer, researcher, whoever comes up with this new feature or thing, they need to give it a name, right? Because you need to put something in the code or on the drawing or something like that. That's upstream, all the way upstream to the source. It's a little bit unrealistic, so very often it's a little bit further down, maybe when the first source content is being created, but pushing it upstream, of course, makes a lot of sense. And again, GRUTS, getting it right at the source, because we also said it's really hard to translate something if you don't understand the source. So getting the source right, obviously for us, is quite important. Yeah, so what else did we have? I need to read the quotes here again. This was not, I thought there was going to be a monitor here, but there isn't. Yeah, also very interesting to argue terminology to the C-level again. It actually should be part of your intellectual property, or should be considered part of your intellectual property. I also thought that was quite surprising. I never thought of that aspect before. But it's true very often, yeah. If you own a brand or a name or a word for a certain product, and the whole world knows you, or country or whatever, knows you for that particular word, you should consider that intellectual property and actually protect it like, I don't know, the engineering designs that are behind it. And last but not least, we, of course, also talked about AI. We had a whole session on AI. There were a few surprising things in there, or maybe not that surprising, but one thing that I found a little bit surprising is if you look at what AI does for terminology and the other way around, perfect. We had a developer in there that is actually working on, you know, physically coding terminology stuff using AI, and he said it's a nightmare for developers at this point, because AI is not at a point yet where you can really productize it or put it in a product so it reliably performs. We all know that, right, as translators, that it does surprising things every now and then. For example, I was playing around the other day with replacing terms and doing stuff, and all of a sudden the AI model told me elephant is an adjective. I don't know if you knew that, but elephant is an adjective. By the way, a female adjective. I'm like, okay, this is way beyond me. So it does surprising things, which makes it really hard also for programmers to actually embed it into products. So I think we should keep that in mind. He said probably 2 years until it becomes reliable and we can actually see products. So don't expect too much really useful and reliable stuff coming out in the next 2 years. I thought that was interesting. But of course, there are immense advances. Terminology extraction, I keep talking about that with people. There's a lot going on there, you know, extracting terminology, comparing your terminology to, I don't know, your website or to that new division's content or something like that, and finding out, do they use synonyms? Should we add forbidden synonyms to our term base? And can we do that efficiently? So there's a lot going on there. But also the other way around, of course, we talked about that also. So not only terminology can benefit greatly from AI, but also the other way around. We just heard in the previous presentation about, you know, knowledge graphs and all of these things benefiting how an AI copilot can work. Because obviously hallucination is one of the two big problems. Inconsistency and simply ignorance of terminology is the other big problem of LMMs. So I think there terminology can help a lot. And we feel this actually already as a terminology solution provider, that companies approach us and say, we have an AI project, we need terminology first. So people are realizing that, and that's a very good thing, I think. And that brings me to my final slide, I think just in time, I hope. Which I put together basically as a, I don't know, closing statement or something like that. I also said it in the panel this morning. I think as an industry, we should realize we actually created AI. Yeah? It actually comes from scientists within our industry. That this is our thing. Well, it's true, right? So we're giving this to the world, and I think we should make it clear to the world that where that comes from, we are the experts. And I think as an industry, we're at the right place, at the right time. We just need to realize it and figure out how we can communicate that to the world. Because after all, as Olga also said, large language models has the word language in it. So maybe this is a chance to become more visible.